Where to begin? Ugh, no. How much do I say? Pow, pow, pow. I don't know why, that's just where my brain went. It's my life and my reading and my channel, so I'm gonna do what I want. Hi everyone, my name's Eliza, and this is my tier ranking of all the books I read in 2023. From worst to best. 2 stars up to my 5 stars, and I actually have quite a few 5 stars this year, well, from last year. Starting off with my only 2-star of the year, which I really wanted to like, Mrs. S by Kay Patrick. I saw this in a bookshop. I hadn't heard of it before. It's about a forbidden sapphic romance, dark academia atmosphere. It's set in an elite, prestigious boarding school. Also, this cover is just beautiful. I just thought it sounded really interesting from the blurb, and it was kind of there that everything went awry. I really wanted to enjoy it, but what held me back was the format and the structure. It was just, it was such a pain, and it was clearly a stylistic choice. I know Sally Rooney does the thing where each time a new person talks, it's on a new line. There's still no quotation marks, okay? But because it's a new line, you can usually work out who's talking. With this one, you can have multiple people talking, no quotation marks, and there's also inner monologue, all in one paragraph. In this one big paragraph, multiple people are talking. It really hindered my enjoyment of the book. Within the first couple of pages, I really was activating my brain to work out who on earth was speaking. No. After a while of reading and struggling, I started reading the audiobook while also reading from the physical. The narrator used different voices to differentiate between the characters, so it made it really easy to work out who was talking, which the book was lacking. And on top of that, there's not a lot that happens in the book, and both of the main characters, who are meant to root for at least on some level, are really dull. You still kind of feel like you're at a distance from them, even though you're reading from one of their points of view. And perhaps that was also a stylistic choice, where there's 2 characters who are in love with the idea of each other, but they don't actually really truly know each other. It would have been a DNF for me, except that I'd already paid for this and the audiobook. Fool me once, fool me twice. Shame on me. My only 2 stars, sorry Kay Patrick. But I hope lots of other people enjoy it. I have 3 3-star reads from 2023. 3 3-star reads 2023, sounds good. Bottom of the 3-star is The Body in the Library by Agatha Christie. It was actually the 3rd Agatha Christie I've ever read, and the 3rd I read last year. The Body in the Library is what you'd expect from an Agatha Christie novel. It's in the Miss Marple series. It can be read as a standalone. You should read The Body in the Library if you enjoy Agatha Christie murder mysteries. Don't read it if you need your thrillers and mysteries to be fast-paced. She's more slow, gentle pace, atmospheric. Things do happen and it is interesting, but it's not written like pow, pow, pow. Next in the 3-star category is a short story, a little novella, which is The Yellow Wallpaper by, I forgot who, Charlotte Perkins Gilman. This is about a woman who believes that she is seeing things in the yellow wallpaper in her house. Her husband doesn't believe her, no one believes her, they all think she's going mad. So what really is going on? You should read this if you enjoy stories where you have to think about and decide for yourself to an extent whether the main character is going mad or if there is something supernatural at play. Next up is We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. We Have Always Lived in the Castle is a good book for you if you want a story set in a mansion with dark cottagecore vibes and eerie atmosphere and a strange set of characters with a dark past. There's a lot of scenes of them using the food that they've grown in their garden to make preserves and jams and fermented stuff. So it's kind of almost got a bit of a witchy, kitcheny vibe. It's not a book where you necessarily like all the main characters or can trust all the main characters. That's a bit on the slower, more meandering, take it as it comes, scenic route of a book. Next up, we have 2 non-fiction books. I sometimes find non-fiction hard to rate because they can cover so many topics. One part of the book you might say, oh yes, 5 out of 5, that really resonates, or I really learned something. Whereas other parts, you just want to skip. It's different to me than fiction, because fiction takes you on a journey of characters, story, all those elements. Whereas non-fiction kind of usually has something that it's going to teach you that you want to learn from it. It's kind of more, I don't know, transactional almost, I find, non-fiction. Also, separating the artist from the art, even though it might be non-fiction and it's not really art, but it can be harder with that, and I find that tricky sometimes. I'm going to start with the non-fiction Memoir by Stephen King on writing, a memoir of the craft. I think I barely started it, and then I thought, actually, this is an audiobook as well, and I had Audible at the time, so I just downloaded it there, and Stephen King's really great to listen to. He sometimes was kind of like, get to the point, what are you going to draw out of this story that is related to writing? Other times I quite enjoyed just hearing about parts of his life that I had no idea about. I haven't actually read a Stephen King novel yet, and this made me want to read more of his. After I finished reading this book, I watched the movie Misery, though, that's based on his novel, and it's a great movie. It's a bit freaky though, but it's a bit less scary because it was made, I think, in 1990. For me, a scaredy cat who doesn't watch any horror, it's doable. I managed to watch it by myself in the daytime though, so you know. Read this if you enjoy memoirs which meander, or are a writer just starting out on your writing journey and want to learn from one of the masters. Don't read it if you have no interest at all in Stephen King's writing or his life, because why would you? My next non-fiction book that I read this year, I keep saying this year, last year, was A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf. It had been on my to-read list for ages. For a long time, I didn't actually realise it was non-fiction. Talking about women and women's rights and women as writers. This is an interesting mix of genres. It's part memoir, part personal essay, non-fiction reflecting on the history of women. I found it difficult at first to capture or understand the tone of voice of Virginia Woolf in this, and I found the audiobook really helpful. At times it was meandering, as memoirs do, a lot, and at other times I was really enjoying and really taking it in and relating to what someone 100 years ago was saying were issues for women, and sadly a lot of it still applies. Read this if you're interested in comparing women's oppression 100 years ago and beyond to now, especially in the field of writing, although do be warned, it's not very intersectional and it is a book of its time, so take that into account when you're reading this, that it doesn't reflect every woman's experience. Don't read this if you have no interest in women's struggles in relation to living in a patriarchal society. So don't read this if you're a misogynist. Is that what I'm saying? Well, actually, to be fair, misogynists are probably some of the people who'd benefit most from reading this, right? I want to read you a little quote that really resonated with me. My annotations. I annotated bits of this book as well. That's how interested I was. I started highlighting and then just gave up because it was the whole page pretty much, but I'll just read you a little bit. She's encouraging women to write. So what she says is, "Therefore, I would ask you to write all kinds of books, hesitating at no subject, however trivial or however vast. By hook or by crook, I hope that you will possess yourselves of money enough to travel and to idle and to contemplate the future or the past of the world, to dream over books and loiter at street corners and let the line of thought dip deep into the stream." That gets me. The next category is books that sparked my interest that were 3.5-ish stars. Solid, decent, but they were lacking something to really make it 4 or 5 stars. First up, we have The Murder of Roger Ackroyd by Agatha Christie. This one was suggested by one of my friends, so she said this is a good one to start with, and this was the second one of hers I read. This is one that I would suggest people want to read if they want to get into Agatha Christie. It's a Poirot book, but it's in a series, but it can be read as a standalone. Read this if you're a fan of Agatha Christie and of her character Poirot and their whodunits. Don't read it if you want a fast-paced thriller. It's not it. Next, we have a short story which is called The Ones Who Walk Away from Olympus. This is a short story by Ursula K. Le Guin. I'd never heard of her until the last couple of years, and now I see quite a few people reading her on BookTube. She's a female sci-fi writer, basically. I think she was writing in the 60s-ish. I might be wrong. I'll write if I'm wrong. I heard about this book for the first time ever from the Book Leo, who's one of my favourite YouTubers. This book's only like 8 pages. It does leave you thinking about it even after you've finished. This book's about a utopian society. For that to be the case, where everyone's living a wonderful, prosperous, flourishing life, one child has to suffer in inhumane conditions. It is tough to read about the child abuse that is happening. It's believed that in order for everyone else to live a good, wonderful life, this child has to live an awful, terrible existence alone. I would recommend it if you want the cogs in your brain to be turning after you read it. Perhaps what you would do in that situation, would you continue living there? Or would you be one of the ones who leaves because you think it's wrong? Or would you even try to get the child out of that situation, even though it would probably be hard because lots of people believe that this is what needs to happen in order for everyone else to have a good free life. It leaves you thinking. So I would recommend it if you want the cogs in your brain to be turning. It's a book that leaves you pondering and leaves you thinking. Don't read it if you want a light and easy short story, because that's not the one for you. The next 3.5-star book was If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. I'd heard awesome things about this book. People were giving it 4 stars, 5 stars, 5 stars all over the place actually. It was going to be 4, but then I kind of forgot that I'd read it shortly after. It didn't leave me with a lot of lasting impact, and I remember it was quite beautifully written in part. The main group of characters, I was about to say cast, it is a cast. They're a group of friends who are studying Shakespearean plays and they're wanting to be actors, and they're at this quite prestigious college. And then murder happens. I don't know if that's a spoiler. I can't remember how far in that happens, but it's near to the beginning. At times the characters could feel a bit flat or kind of like stereotypes, but maybe that was the point, because perhaps they're meant to be like the archetypes like in Shakespeare's plays, and that's a commentary on that. Read this if you want some dark academia murder mystery vibes within a young adult book. Don't read it if you loved The Secret History, because this one kind of pales in comparison and isn't as complex and doesn't hit quite so hard. Law Olympus Volume 2. Law Olympus is a reinvention of Greek myths with modern technology. The gods and goddesses have cars, have mobile phones. It's kind of like a high school drama a little bit. The illustrations are just stunning. So many beautiful colors, really inventive. I did start reading the comics a few years ago, but I do want to keep reading it, but it's not a top priority. I do have a bit of an ick about how Persephone is portrayed as so innocent and childlike, and yet she's clearly hypersexualized and is getting into a relationship with Hades, who's meant to be older and more worldly, and how basically kind of like power imbalance I don't know, maybe I'm just thinking about it too much. Read this if you're interested in a Greek mythology retelling in graphic novel form with amazing colours and visuals. Don't read it if you need an accurate portrayal of the original source material, because this differs from the reality of the myths a lot. Next is a murder mystery called The Silent House by Nell Patterson. This was the first book I think I've ever read that had deaf characters in it. And I really enjoyed that aspect, which was a big part of the book because most of the characters were either deaf or part of the deaf community because of their relatives. I found it not just enjoyable as a piece of fiction, you know, a whodunit. The representation was done in a sensitive and authentic way, and also made it accessible for people who are very ignorant about the deaf community. I want to read the second one. I actually have the second one ready on my Kindle, I forgot. And this one I actually solved. I was so proud of myself. But then I was like, does that mean it was too obvious? You could actually work it out with the clues. Now, I've read quite a few murder mysteries, thrillers. There were a few things where I was like, I wonder if. And I wondered if about one thing, or 1/3-ish of the way through, and it seemed to fit with everything. I worked out the next thing, like 2/3 of the way through, and that was who had done it. So, I was proud of myself. Gold star. If you read this and you solve it as well, let me know. I recommend this for people who want a solid murder mystery that has a bit of extra representation in it. The Silent House wasn't super scary or fast-paced, so keep that in mind if you're deciding to read this one. Next up, we have another thriller, which is The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. The Silent Patient is about a psychologist who kind of tracks down a famous artist who killed her husband, who's in an asylum, a rehab kind of center. I don't think they call them asylums anymore. Anyway, you understand what I mean. In a rehab center. And she hasn't spoken since that happened, and that was years ago now. So he wants to get her to speak, hence The Silent Patient, the name. This one got me out of a reading slump. It has short chapters, which makes it feel faster paced. I'm not sure if the ending actually worked for me or not. Read this if you enjoy thrillers which touch on elements of psychology. Don't read this if you need to like or root for every character, because everyone's kind of got something going on in this book that is questionable or just flat out illegal. Next category, we have the books that were 4 or 4.5 stars, where I'm a fan. I want to read more, or I would read them again. The last Agatha Christie book I read in 2023. Well, it was the first one, but it's the last on this list because it's the highest, the one I enjoyed the most. And that is And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. This is a locked room murder mystery. But if you enjoyed the movie Clue from the 80s with Tim Curry, where all these random people are invited to a dinner party and they don't know why they're there, they don't know what's going on, but clearly they all have something in common, and then murders occur, then this is for you. I did know one spoiler going into it. I didn't know who the murderer or murderers were, but I did know one little thing that played in my mind when I was reading it, but I still didn't work out who it was. Someone basically works it out at the very, very end in an epilogue, or it's revealed, or I don't want to give too much away. There is some outdated language that was changed because it was completely derogatory and racist originally. Separating the artist from the art is hard. Just take that with a grain of salt when you read it or watch it, because after I read this, I did watch the original film that's based on this novel that was made in the 50s or the 40s even. That was interesting to watch, especially because it's different at the end. If you do read it, watch the movie as well. You might have some trouble with And Then There Were None if you have to have a really character-driven book, because there are, I think, over 10 characters that we meet who are on this island stranded together, and because there's so many of them and it's quite a short book, you don't get to know every one of them super well. I did find myself confusing the characters at times. Next up, Galatea by Madeline Miller. Does it deserve a spot in the 4 stars if I can't really remember what happens? It's a short story about Galatea, who was, in Greek myth, a woman made from clay who was turned into a real human being. This is kind of like a feminist retelling of it. I'd recommend this if you're a Madeline Miller fan, if you enjoyed The Song of Achilles or Cersei, then this is a fun little short thing to enjoy. Next in the 4 stars is Electra by Jennifer Saint. I had previously read her book before this, Ariadne, about Ariadne and her sister Phaedra from Greek mythology. And this is of course about Electra, who you may or may not know. She is the daughter of Clytemnestra from the Trojan War. This follows the points of view of Electra, her mother, Clytemnestra, and Cassandra, the Princess of Troy, who often gets forgotten about. Cassandra wasn't even in the Troy movie from 2004. It's like they had 3 women in that movie and they thought, that's enough. Even though all the men look the same in that film. They all look the same, except for Brad Pitt, because he's Achilles and he's important and he was the Hollywood heartthrob of the time. I enjoyed this one more than Ariadne. This one had a better pacing. I'd recommend this if you want a fresh take on the Trojan War myth and looking at some of the women from the myth who are often forgotten about. Don't read this if you are so done with Trojan War stories. Leave it for another time if you're feeling sick of them. Don't force yourself to read something that you're done with. Next is actually the last book I read last year, which was The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. This threw me back into my Hunger Games obsession. I saw the movie twice at the cinema both times. I went to the cinema 4 times last year, twice to see this movie and twice to see Barbie. I went with my friends to see Barbie and then I went with my dad to see Barbie. And I saw the movie the first time before I started reading the book because for ages I wasn't sure if I wanted to read the book. I'd heard really mixed reviews. I knew it was like 500 pages and some people said it was really slow and boring and I wasn't sure if I wanted to commit to that or if it was worth my time. Man, was I wrong! Suzanne Collins doesn't miss. The Hunger Games was superb and this was too. They're very different. The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes follows President Snow when he was a young man, like when he was a teenager, and how he was a mentor for a girl, Lucy Gray, from District 12. There is so much to analyse in this book. I had it on my Kindle and I wish I actually had a physical copy because I would have written down so many notes. It's 3rd person, but it's pretty much almost from 1st person point of view of Coriolanus Snow, who becomes President Snow. Where to begin? There's so much to say. It just threw me back into the world of Panem and I loved it. It was like nostalgia from when I was a teenager reading The Hunger Games. It was interesting watching the movie and then going to the book. The movie changes a lot and makes him seem less sympathetic and I think also more clever than he really is. It was interesting to see what they changed. There's a lot of things that other characters do in the book that they make him do in the movie that makes him seem more empathetic. Everything that he does is opportunistic and to further his own personal gain. It's all greed. It's all about his image. It's all about preserving his image. It's all about Snow landing on top. He doesn't care about other people. If you want to know more about the book from an analysis point of view, I would recommend A Clockwork Reader's analysis that goes for almost an hour, but I agree with all her points. It's so in depth. Really recommend. The book Leo also has, I think, 2 videos about both the book and the movie and the character of Coriolanus Snow and what Suzanne Collins was trying to say in this book. Oh, also, side note, I partially read it on my Kindle and partially read it via audiobook, and I recognized the voice actor. I was like, is this Prince Hans from Frozen? And it was. I forget his name, Santiago someone. He has a great voice for audiobooks, and I feel like he was really well cast because his character of Hans in Frozen and his character of Snow, they both put up the image of being very caring and proper and empathetic. They have charm that they use to their advantage, but really they're insidious as hell. It's all a front. Whoever cast him, well done. Also to him himself, great voice acting. I really enjoyed listening to him. I recommend this Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes if you want to be thrown back into the Hunger Games universe, and if you want to read about despicable characters and their kind of inner workings in their brain. Don't read this if you're not into dystopians or sci-fi, or you need to like your characters and have them be good people, because he's not. Last up in the I'm a fan category is Winter Girls by Laurie House Anderson. This is a reread for me. I read it when I was in a bit of a reading slump after the beginning part of the year when I was on roll reading lots, and then I wasn't sure what to read and I was having lots of trouble, and so I went to this and it didn't disappoint. I think I used to rate it 5 stars and now it's more 4.5 for me, but it still gets me in the feels. I first read it when I was in high school, and I remember thinking that it was so groundbreaking at the time for me because it had a really interesting narrative style where it will have something written and then crossed out. It also was multimedia where it had bits of texts and emails and, at the time, website blog posts. Winter Girls is a contemporary novel about a girl suffering from anorexia and dealing with the death of her best friend who also had an eating disorder. Needless to say, the content is really heavy, so read this if you have a strong backbone regarding going into a story about girls with their anorexia and how that affects every aspect of their lives. If you're struggling with those things yourself, this probably isn't for you because it's hard to read at times and some of the content is confronting. It's still a worthwhile read that kind of makes you think about how precious life is. This is so exciting. It's the last category, which is Forever Favorites. These are all 5-star books and there's 6 of them, which for me is really good, and I'm really happy that I've got so many 5-star books from 2023. The first book is All the Sinners Bleed by S.A. Cosby. It is a thriller that starts with a black cop in the Deep South in the US. At the very end of the first chapter, he's called to the local school where there is a gunman. I don't want to say too much from there on because the story unravels very well at its own pace without me giving things away too much. The book just had this heaviness to it. It has some very dark themes and dark things that happen, and also creepy things. There's also quite a lot about child abuse in this novel, so be aware regarding those trigger warnings. It's not super graphic, but it's you still know what's going on, and that's confronting. I hadn't heard of this book until I saw a review by The Poptimist that was really good. Read this if you want to read a thriller that Barack Obama recommends. If you want a book that leaves you thinking and pondering, especially about race, then this would be an interesting book for you that has the thriller elements, but it's deeper than just being for entertainment's sake. And then try to understand my own levels of privilege and not be ignorant, basically. I still learned quite a few things from this book, or saw things in a new way with deeper understanding. I really recommend it for everyone, as long as you can stand the dark themes and the trigger warnings and all that stuff. Next we have a picture book, which is Godfather Death by Sally Nichols and Julia Sarda. Just amazing. That's Satan there, having a good time. This is a Grimm's fairy tale retelling, which I didn't realise when I picked it up. Even though it looks quite dark, for some reason I thought it was going to be a fun thing like, oh, Death has to look after like a baby and has trouble with the earthly things of like changing its nappy. I don't know why, that's just where my brain went, even though it looks like this. I'll read you the blurb to give you a bit more of an idea. Death is an honest man. He cannot be tricked or bargained with, and he definitely cannot be escaped. But for one poor desperate fisherman, he learns that lesson with the biggest price to pay. I don't even think I read the blurb when I bought it. I just went, that's cool. If you enjoy fables and fairy tales with the dark elements, you will enjoy this. Don't read this if you were like me and thought it was something light and fun, and that's what you're in the mood for. Next up, I have two books that kind of go together. First up is The Book of Egyptian Myths by Jean Menzies, illustrated by Katie Ponder. The illustrations in this are beautiful, and I follow Jean on YouTube and have done for like 10 years, and she's just so knowledgeable and fantastic to watch, and her understanding of different mythologies is so deep. I think I'm obsessed, and then I learn something new from like a children's book by her. So this really reignited my passion for the Egyptian mythology. I think I enjoyed Egyptian mythology first and then got introduced to Greek mythology on a deeper level later, and you just see heaps more about Greek mythology, especially with so many retellings these days. But I really loved this. I think at first I gave it 4 stars, and then at the end, well, even the beginning of 2024, I went back and went, nah, it needs to be a 5-star. Let me show you some of the illustrations. Beautiful. So one of my favorites, Hathor. Love her. So pretty. Very pretty. If you want to learn about Egyptian myths at a beginner level, or if you feel like you knew a bit when you're a child and you want to go back to it and reignite that passion, this is for you. Similarly, also by the same author and illustrator, is Goddesses and Heroines. This is about women and goddesses and heroines in mythology from all over the world. Goddesses of the sun, moon and sky. Here's Hathor, who's also in the Egyptian mythology book, and this is actually the same myth, but it's still rewritten in a new way in here. The illustrations are just beautiful, and the language and the way that you learn things is really clear, and it makes me want to go and learn even more, like when I was a kid and just wanted to absorb all the myths and fantastical stories that I could. Thank you, Jean and Katie, for reigniting my passions in all the different types of mythology, because this was really special to me and I had a great time with both of them. We're on to the top 2. Very exciting. I don't know if this is cheating, because my top 2 are both rereads. But also it's my life and my reading and my channel, so I'm going to do what I want. Second from the top is Am I There Yet by Mari Andrew. It just gets me in the feels. It's a selection of essays, personal essays from her. She has an Instagram that she started ages ago, and I first saw her through that, and then she published a book that is based on some of her illustrations and her writing. It's really prevalent even now when I'm almost 30 compared to when I read it when I was, I don't know, 24, or actually I might have even been younger. The loop-de-loop zigzagging journey to adulthood, and it's all about kind of finding your path in life, and she has a very slow, kind and gentle, soft approach to life. I like when she includes a map in her books. I love any maps in books. Maps just make everything better. This is your life and this is the moment. If you enjoyed those illustrations and you're interested in personal essays that are sort of about life, then you'll enjoy this book. And now for my best book of 2023. It is Cersei by Madeline Miller. I read Cersei for the first time in 2019, so 4 years later I felt like it was time to return to this world of ancient Greek mythology. It's about a witch who is exiled to an island all her own, at least for a while. The writing style from Madeline Miller is just superb. She really knows how to help you visualize these immortal deities and their personalities and how awful they can be. And the character of Cersei is a very sympathetic character, and you really root for her. She's exiled away from her family, but that's sort of her key to freedom, because she doesn't have to live up to the external expectations anymore, and she's powerful within her own right. It's one of my favorites of all time, and I've read it twice now, and I know I'll read it again. I haven't actually read this physical copy that's in my hands. I read this on my Kindle actually when I was traveling in Greece, and it's set in Greece, and it has the Palace of Knossos in it, and I went to that in Crete as well, and it was so exciting to go, that's where the book is set in part, and I just went there. Even though I knew what was going to happen in the story, the end still had me on the verge of tears. This is a gently paced read that touches on a lot of Greek myth stories, but you don't have to know much about those to appreciate and understand. I don't know what else to say other than it holds a special place in my heart. I know I'll reread it, and I will keep recommending it to people. And I just... I have to say though, the inside is also beautiful. Ooh. Just a little bit of ASMR for you at the very end. That is my reading wrap up of all the books I read in 2023. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you also had a good reading year, and I hope you have an even better one in 2024. Like and subscribe if you'd like to see more. I'll see you in the next video. Bye!